So now that we understand how to use functions, how to create functions, and about function prototypes, I want to move on to the different sort of function patterns. Meaning, what are the ways that the function prototype can show up? Okay, so let's look at that. We're going to start with the very first pattern, and this pattern is quite straightforward. These are the type of functions that do not return anything. Hence, you notice that we have void. So whenever a function does not return anything, it's a void. The return type, the type is void. And likewise, you notice that the parentheses, they're empty, which signifies that this function, foo, does not require any arguments, or it does not have any parameters. All it does is to do some a bit of work inside the curly braces, and that's it. Usually this type of function simply prints some kind of message, or does some kind of calculation, and then prints the result of that calculation. So for example, this function might look like this. Okay, a function called hello, and all it does is to print hello. Notice there is no return statement, and that's why you see void. Likewise, there is no mention of any variable name, right? So there's no variable name in here, right? Because here the parameter list is empty. Now, how could you code up such a thing? That's quite straightforward. Let's do this together. Let me switch to my Visual Studio Code. Okay. Now, step one, we need to provide the function prototype. So the first thing I'll do is to say void. The name is hello, and it does not have any parameters. And most importantly, I need to put the semicolon. Great. So now that I have my function prototype, I will come underneath main, and I will implement this function. Void hello. Notice I'm going to type the same thing, except I'm not going to put a semicolon. I will instead put curly braces because I want to have a body. And so I'm going to say cout some message like hello world. Okay, and that's it. All I have to do now is to make use of this function by calling it from main. Okay, and so how do I call it? Well, all I have to do is to say hello, and that's it. Okay, so whenever you want to use a function with this pattern whereby it's void and it doesn't have any parameters, all you have to do is to type the name of the function followed by an open and close parenthesis, and that's it. Let's verify this. Let me quickly compile. And let's execute. Okay, so we see we have it here. Notice it seems I need to skip a line, so I'm just going to come back here, \n, save it, recompile, re-execute, and that solves it. Okay, so this is the first pattern. Let's move on to the second pattern. Okay, so again, obviously we discussed this. How do you call pattern one? Quite straightforward. The name followed by the empty parentheses. So pattern two is simply, again, a function that does not return anything, so it's still void. However, this function expects something to be provided, so it does have parameters. Okay, so an example of this pattern can look like this. Okay, I have a function called printer. It's void again, and it requires that you pass in a value, a variable that is, of type double. So the parameter that you pass in must be of type double, and there's only one parameter. And what does it do with that parameter? It simply prints it out. Okay, so again, still void. So notice there is no return statement anywhere in this function body. How do you call such a function? It's quite straightforward. You write the name of the function, and then you simply pass in a value. Okay, and that's it. Let's switch over to Visual Studio Code and code this up. Okay, so again, I need a function prototype. So I'm going to come here below this first function prototype, and I'm going to create my second one, printer. It takes a double, let's say val, and I must remember the semicolon. Great, that's step one. And now I need to implement it. So I'm going to come down here underneath hello, and I will implement printer. Okay, so to implement printer, okay, I'll type the same thing that I have for the prototype, except I'm going to have curly braces. And so inside the curly braces, I'm going to write the body. Okay, so I'm going to say cout val, which is the name of the variable. Okay, all right, so whenever I say parameter, okay, it's a variable that you can use. Okay, that's it. And now we have to call it. So I'm going to come down here or up here in main, and I'm going to call it, and I know how to call it. I type the name and I give it some value. Let's give it maybe 2.2. Okay, okay, good. So let's recompile and let's rerun. Okay, great, it gives me 2.2. Okay, let's move on to the next pattern. Okay, now this third pattern, it switches things around. It does not take anything, no parameter list, right? You don't provide it anything. However, it sends something back. Okay, in this example, it's sending back a string, but obviously we could send back any other type, a double or an int, a bool, and so on. So because this the return type here is not void, then we know for sure that inside the body we should see a return statement. Okay, so if it's not void, there must be a return statement in your code. Now, how do you call such a function? Well, all you have to do in main, okay, let me not go too far ahead of myself. Reply is an example of this pattern. Okay, so I create a string called MSG, and then I send back that string. Okay, so how do you call such a function? Well, because the function returns something, inside main, where we're calling this function, we must store the answer that is returned. Okay, so notice I'm going to call the function, I write the name, empty parameter list, right, empty parentheses. However, I know that this function will send me back something, and so I will store that something in a variable. So I want you to notice the pattern. Create a variable, put the equal sign, and then call the function, so that whatever is returned is stored inside the result variable. And then, of course, we can go ahead and print that answer that is returned. Okay, so this part is important here as well, the second line. If you want to see what was returned, you must print it. Okay, so let's switch over to Visual Studio Code and see what this looks like. Okay, so the function prototype. Okay, I implement it now down here. Okay, so I create a variable. Okay, and then I return it back to whoever is calling the function, which is main. So I'm going to say MSG, and that's that. Let's use it. Okay, I don't want to see these ones anymore. So for now, I'm just going to comment them out. Okay, when you comment it out, it won't be called. Okay, good. So I only want to focus on calling reply. All right, so I'm going to say create a variable of the same type, string. Okay, so because it's sending back a string, I need to make sure that I need to create a string variable. Okay, and now I can call the function. Okay, and then I know it's going to give me back an answer, and I can print that answer out. Okay, let's test it out. Compile and run, and there we go. We get back okay. Wonderful. Let's look at the next pattern. Okay. Now this pattern is simply now saying, okay, this pattern simply will, okay, it seems I don't have an example like here. However, this pattern is the case where we have both. Okay, we have a parameter list. Okay, so this function which computes the area of a triangle, it takes two parameters, the base of the triangle and the height of the triangle. In addition to having a parameter, having parameters, the function also returns something. Okay, so it does both. It returns something and it also expects something. So this is the fourth pattern. So notice here, I compute the area of the triangle, half base times height. I store it in a variable called result, and then I send back that result. Now, because it's sending back something in main, when I call it, I must also create a variable. Okay, so notice I create a variable, equal sign, and then I call the function, and I must pass in two things. Okay, and of course I can print that answer. Okay, let's look at that. Okay, so let me comment out this. Right, so step one, the prototype. So it's a double area of triangle. And it requires two things. Now let's implement. Let's call it area, seems a better name. And now I can return area. Okay. So now I come up here in main and I create a variable of the type double. I'm going to call it result, and now I will call the function area of triangle, but I must pass in two things. Let's say the base is 5 and the height is 10. Okay, so let's see what we get back. Compile. Remember, every time I make a change to my file, I need to recompile. Okay, let's rerun. 25. Okay, that works. Now, one thing one thing is beginners tend to make this mistake. Okay, so beginners, even though we need to provide two things, a beginner might sometimes forget, and they might say, okay, I'll only pass one. Okay, and right away we're seeing that it's a problem, right? Too few arguments. And if we try to compile it, it's going to tell us that much, right? It's telling me that too few arguments, right? I need to pass in not one but two. Okay, great. Another mistake I see beginning programmers make is that they don't call the function properly. They might just do this, right? They might just call the function name, and again, that's incorrect, right? If I try to compile this, we will get an error. Okay, exactly, right? Right. So obviously, for our program to compile properly, we must follow the function prototype, right? Notice up here it's telling me it expects two things and it should return one thing. Okay, so when you're calling it, you must pass in as many things as it is expecting. So 5, 10. Okay, good. So notice again, a function might not require anything up here. Okay, so we don't pass in anything. A function might only want one thing, so we must pass in exactly one thing. Here the function requires two things, and so we must pass in exactly two things. All right, so I will leave this video here. It's going too long. In the next video, I will continue looking at the next pattern when it comes to functions that you tend to see quite a lot in programming. So I'll see you in that video.